Hello, hello. Hi, NFT Roundtable audience. Today it is June 17th, right? It's Thursday, June 17th, 2021. Today I'm talking to Anne Faver, who is the COO of Oasis Labs, which is a company focused on building privacy technology for the real world. So, welcome, Anne. How are you doing today?
Yeah, good. So happy to be here, Iris. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us. I love hearing about new technologies in the space and what companies are
Yeah.
working on. So I'm looking forward to digging into it. Let's get straight into it. So, what is Oasis Labs?
Yeah, so Oasis Labs is a couple things. I'll explain it at a high level and then how we fit into the NFT space as well. So Oasis Labs is a company that was founded a couple years ago to build a decentralized blockchain network called the Oasis Network. And the main goal of that network was to build a proof of stake decentralized network, so similar to Ethereum 2.0, but with confidentiality and privacy built into that network. And why we think that's meaningful is there's a lot of things and a lot of when we think about the world changing and we think about uh, blockchain becoming the new internet, there's a lot of information, a lot of data that you'll want to remain private when you use it. And so we think it's really important that that exists. And that includes things like health records that may run on a system, any sort of machine learning algorithm, ads, anything that requires sensitive data. You may not want that on a fully public blockchain. And so having the ability to add privacy is really important. We've been really motivated, particularly by both the benefit of adding privacy and then also really being able to provide users with and individuals with the ability to own and control their data from start to end, which I think is a real principle in general of the Web3 world. So, how do we fit into the NFT space? Well, we've been working on what we think will be a next generation of NFTs, which we call data-backed tokens, or essentially you can think of it as an NFT of data. And so, I think one simple way to think about this is right now, when you think of NFTs, you think of it storing some uh, set piece of information, some stagnant piece of information like art. But in the future, what that could also represent is something more dynamic. So the NFT could be a token that represents your data. And as it gets used, you have some token that represents that data. And so there's some interesting healthcare use cases for that. There's also some really big use cases that creators could use. Like imagine Patreon, if you actually had a token that showed how many people were actually going to your page every day, for example. So lots to do here. And obviously, we can dive more into that, but hopefully that gives a little bit of an overview. Oh, I'm having trouble hearing you
Oh,
actually.
whoops, my bad. I was on mute. So,
No worries.
so there's a lot there. So I'm gonna
Yeah.
backtrack a little bit and dig in to some of what you said. So you talked about blockchain. On the
Mhm.
blockchain, you may not want to have certain data be entirely public. I'm wondering how Oasis Labs kind of reconciles with the, I guess, kind of the fact that a lot of people see blockchain and the crypto space as
Mhm.
being like transparency
Yeah.
focused. So this seems like a
Yeah.
little bit antithetical to that.
Yeah. No, it's a very fair question. And so I think what I'd say is the question is, where do you want transparency in the process? So what the Oasis network does, and I believe this is incredibly important, is it provides transparency that actions are happening. So similar to Ethereum, anytime a transaction is sent, or even Bitcoin, you can trace that transaction. So I send money to you, you can follow that transaction, and that is all public. We have block explorers and other tools to track and trace all of that information. What's private is perhaps the underlying data of that transaction. And so I agree that Ethereum and most public, fully public blockchains, they're beneficial for a lot of things where you want all the information to be public. Supply chains are a great example of this. You want to be able to follow this information. I'd say traditional NFTs are another piece of this. You want to be able to follow who's had ownership
Mm-hmm.
of a certain asset over time. that becomes a little less compelling when you're thinking about things like your genomic data or your health records or your credit data. All of those things, I think we've seen huge risks in Web 2 when that gets breached. And so if we really want the internet to move completely from the internet as it is today, where we're reliant on big companies to, serve us products and they really hold ownership to a decentralized world, part of that is bringing these applications that hold sensitive data over to a blockchain as well. And so that's, I think, where we feel like there's a real need.
Okay.
The last thing I'd say is, we're not the only ones. We were one of the first in the space to do this. But you are seeing there are other teams in the Ethereum ecosystem and in the Polkadot ecosystem that are beginning to think about privacy as well. And so, and it's in these similar areas: healthcare, finance, et cetera.
Okay, so it's taking the blockchain technology, the benefits of the blockchain technology, and applying it to data that really does need to be private. So exactly. What are those benefits of blockchain that are being used for data that needs to be private?
Yeah, absolutely. So we talk about it. The phrase I like to use is a responsible data economy. So if you think about the internet today, for example, and I alluded to this earlier, we're wholly dependent on big companies like Google and Facebook and Apple to hold our data, store that data, and frankly, they get to monetize it as well. And in this world, we're an input for them. What's, to me, incredibly compelling about blockchain technology is it totally turns that value on its head. And so instead of a big company being the store or owner of my data, I become in control of that data. I can upload it. I can decide what to do with it. This is true for currency as well, right? And ultimately, I can see who has access to it, and I can decide who hasn't and who doesn't. We've seen this, I think, first in the blockchain space with just cryptocurrency in general. I mean, we think about Bitcoin being, impenetrable of sort of government, being shut down by a government. And that's really because it's a decentralized system where you can't just stop it. And so in many ways, and if you own a Bitcoin, you own it, right? Like it's yours, you hold custody of it. And so what to me is so compelling about blockchain technology is it does that for things beyond just a token. It does it for data as well. And really in the world of the internet, everything is data. It's just some form of data or another. So I think it unlocks a whole new system.
Okay, so that custodial element is really important here because custody allows you to monetize and have controls. So what are some of the things y'all are thinking about when it comes to the lack of regulation in the space? Because I could see, for example, there being room for scamming people out of their data, right? Just like we see people getting scammed out of their wallets, right? So how does that kind of protection fit in?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of debate right now on this idea of data monetization on a whole. Like one concern with it, for example, is that, so the ACLU's written a lot about this, where you might see a world where you have an economy like we have in the real world, which is that like there's some people that will be wealthy enough that they don't have to sell their data, and then others who, because they can't afford any other option, have to be able to access the internet. That's obviously not what we want. And so I think more of the use cases we're focused on have been more in the area where it's about what you can unlock by having your data be a part of a system. And so that could be something like a medical research trial. It could be like providing research for a government lab. And so I think by focusing on those use cases first, as opposed to, things that are solely like upload your data, get money. I think we're trying to find and work with teams that are compelled by more impactful use cases.
Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, it's something certainly that I think we'll need to monitor and look at, and
Mm-hmm.
try to combat. I think this is a challenge with any decentralized system is you only have so much control over what happens,
Right.
and then both the cool and the risky is that there's some unknown element as well.
Yeah. I think the health part is really cool because I have been particularly frustrated as an adult, and as an adult that has moved around a lot. I've lived in many different
Hmm.
states and
Hmm.
cities, and so I've had to switch doctors a lot, and getting
Yeah,
medical records and having that medical history is
yeah,
such a headache. And so I would love if I was able to just kind of own all of that and have it with me as I move from
yeah,
place to place. And I can see all of the inefficiencies in the healthcare system, and a lot of that being rooted in just data, just like healthcare data just being like kind of all over the place and disorganized.
yeah. It's really hard because right now the way it's set is it's the regulation makes it very hard for hospitals even to share it with other hospitals
Mm-hmm.
because it goes back to that custody issue. They have to change custody of that
Mm-hmm.
data, and that's very difficult to do under HIPAA
Mm-hmm.
regulations. We're actually working. This is an extreme example, but one of the developers on our platform has built essentially an EHR for
What
refugees,
is
and the
EHR?
idea. Oh, sorry, electronic health
Okay.
records
Okay.
platform. So that's like the app you would use to store your medical data.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you described is like 10 times worse if you're a refugee because what happens, I hadn't realized this, but you first arrive at a refugee camp, and there's often actually, even on that camp, multiple medical groups that are supporting the people who are living in those
Mm,
camps. And each of those actually have their own medical record silos because they're all their own
mm-hmm.
systems. And so even when you're waiting to be placed in a country, you're stuck in this situation where you might have multiple fractured
Mm-hmm.
systems. And then when you go to a country, it's very hard right now to port this data to a
Mm-hmm.
system. And so they've basically been working with us to build one holistic app that can be used by medical professionals at refugee camps where it all can be stored.
Mm-hmm.
Or it can be stored separately, but all held in one place and
Mm-hmm.
make it easier to port over. So yeah, it's a huge problem, and that's obviously the most extreme example. But yeah,
Yeah, this is very cool. It makes me think of like a universal language,
hmm,
and code and technology being able to provide like this
yeah,
universal language that we can that allows like people from around the world and countries with different
hmm,
cultures to be able to still um, collaborate
yeah.
using technology.
Yeah, I think a lot of this feeling of I don't know. I'm sure. Like I always think about these ads that in the early 2000s that you'd get from IBM about like the power of big data. But unfortunately, right now, a lot of that's been really blocked by regulation or just competing companies or, frankly, just a lack of good
Mm-hmm.
systems. And so, at a baseline, what technology can do is allow us to have a universal
Mm-hmm.
database of this information. And so, that's one thing I think is very cool about this technology.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I want to pause
Yeah,
really quickly and talk a bit about you.
yeah.
So tell us a bit about your background and
Mhm.
how you got to your role at Oasis Labs as COO.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So I actually started my career in politics. My first job out of college, well, I worked on the Hillary Clinton's campaign in 2008,
Okay.
which was, both heartbreaking and also a great experience.
Mm-hmm.
It's never fun to lose.
Mm-hmm.
And then worked in DC in foreign policy for about 4 years. I worked for Madeleine Albright, the former Secretary of State, doing two things. One is helping on some foreign policy initiatives she was doing, and two, she had a consulting firm that basically helped companies deal with issues in emerging markets. So I was mostly focused on China and India and helping U.S. companies deal with regulatory issues in those markets. It was fun, but I went to business school and was looking for some new opportunities. So pivoted to tech after that, and then worked at Apple as a product manager on the iPhone for about 3.5 years. Amazing experience, and then went to an earlier stage startup, and then to Oasis. And the reason I went to Oasis was, I guess, twofold. One is I'd started to trade cryptocurrencies myself. I'd started to look into the technology, and felt like, for all the reasons I've just mentioned before, there was something really compelling and new about the space, and I wanted to be a part of it. And I really wanted to be a part of really thinking through what it could do. Like, it's such an early, we're still in such an early stage that there's so much open field in terms of what you'll be able to do with this technology. So that seemed really exciting. The other is, I was really compelled and excited by the particular mission around data privacy and data ownership that Oasis had. And I think for me, I'd gotten a taste of that at Apple. I worked a lot on their focus on data privacy for their consumers, and I think it's a very genuine feeling that they have. And that seemed very compelling to me. The thing that I also began to realize, though, is as a user, you're still very dependent, on these companies to do the right thing. Like, I actually really do trust Apple, but there is a level of trust that you have to create with a corporate entity. And when you think about, then going to smaller companies, and when they use your data, like, they may tell you that they're going to, use it for something, but their business objectives or incentives may change. And with that, so too may be the promises that they've made to their users. You hope it doesn't happen, but there's an element of trust that you have to give. And I don't know, it just felt kind of crazy to me that we were putting this trust in corporations. Like, they're just inherently not aligned. They may be altruistic, they may be great, but by definition, their interests are different than that of their users. And so going somewhere that was really trying to put ownership and trust back into the hands of individuals was really compelling to me. And so, and that's how I got here. So I've been at Oasis for about 3 years, and it's been, as is true of any early stage company, it's been a wild ride, very exciting, and lots of fun things still to work on and to be challenged by as well.
Can you talk a bit about your role there and what your kind of day-to-day involvement is?
Yeah, so first I'd say I actually started off leading marketing, and in about a year in took over as a product lead for our network launch. And I think, to the extent advice is helpful here, like, I did it because it needed to get done. And so one of the cool things about, I think, early stage startups is you never have enough people to accomplish what you want to accomplish. And so there's a lot of opportunity, I think, just to dive in and get your hands dirty and learn a lot along the way. After we launched our network in November, I took over the role of COO and have been in that role since. And now I'd say my role, it's varied over time, right? Like, I went from, I think, having more of a functional expertise, a really clear plan of what I do every day. So now I see my job more as an unblocker. And so I work really across the company with our engineering and product and operations teams. And my primary function is to make sure that the people that work at Oasis can do their jobs, and that they're unblocked, and that it's clear, and that when we come across issues, we can address them quickly. And so that looks, I work a lot with our product team to make sure we're moving in the right direction, a lot with our engineering team. And then I spend a lot of time talking to our community and to our users about what they like about the product, what they don't like about the product, all to try to help it grow.
And how big is Oasis Labs now?
Yeah, it's about 45 people,
Okay.
and we have, similar to a lot of companies, as we've gone through COVID, we've gone from being a company based in the Bay Area to being, a decentralized company that has a small satellite in the Bay Area.
Okay.
I'm still there. We have a big team in Slovenia.
Okay.
We have a really strong group of engineers there, a group in Asia, and then folks across the U.S., mostly in California, but
Okay.
across the U.S. as well. Yeah.
Cool. So let's
Yeah.
let's let's get back to privacy
Yeah.
um and I'm wondering for the folks in our audience, because many of them are NFT based.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's talk a bit about like the difference, dive into the difference between a data backed token and an
Yeah.
NFT.
Yeah. So I'd say at the core, they're the same, right? So an NFT is a non-fungible
Mm-hmm.
token, and the primary goal of it is that it represents some unique thing. It's there's only one of them that
Mm-hmm.
exists, and so they've primarily been used to date for static
Mm-hmm.
assets like art or music,
Mm-hmm.
to say this is my record, my authentication of this thing that I
Mm-hmm.
own. Um, Really what we're doing is that just I'd say at a more complex level, and so it's to say we're taking that idea and now saying in addition to owning your art, you'll now have a token that represents a more complex piece of data.
Mm-hmm.
That data could be your genome.
Mm-hmm.
We just did this genomic NFT with a customer of ours. It could be a representative of we're working with a music company. It could be representative of how many Spotify listens you've had as a
Mm-hmm.
musician. But the idea is that it's a token where the value is really tied to some data behind it.
Okay.
And so that's the primary distinction.
Gotcha. So it is a non-fungible token. It's just that it has
Exactly.
data as opposed to a static asset. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think the other cool thing is when you think about, I think a lot of people have been talking about like creator coins, and that's sort of a variation of an NFT. One of the challenges I think with those now and NFTs is the value feels very hypey, right? Like it's simply tied to how much excitement there is around a particular thing on a given
Mm-hmm.
day. And so there's some amount of data associated with that, of course. How much was it auctioned for?
Mm-hmm.
But that is very volatile.
Mm-hmm.
And so our goal is to actually be able to tie these tokens to some true sense of value. So I'll explain this music example a little bit
Mm-hmm.
more. So we're working with this company, and basically what they do is they invest. It's called Music Fund, and they invest in working artists. So if you're a musician and you need cash right now, they'll invest in you, give you upfront cash for a percentage of your royalties over the next few
Mm-hmm.
years. And so right now this is all done off chain. But what they'd like to do is actually have this set up so that you use our system and they make some investment, and your music and your listenings and your royalties are actually held in a token.
Mm-hmm.
And so that value of that token actually goes up the more Spotify listens you have.
Mm-hmm.
So as your royalties increase, this token actually increases as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then you could sell that token, for example, to your listeners, to fans, etc., and they then can participate in the work that you're doing. It can be a way that they can invest in you as an artist and in as a person. And so that's one example of how I think how this could play in a more like creator oriented way as well.
So instead of in that example, instead of the NFT having the artwork in it, it has the data that's
it would have like the
related
Spotify
to the
data.
artwork. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. So I know that another area that y'all are tapping into is DeFi. So could you talk about where Oasis Labs fits in the DeFi world?
Yeah, so this goes back to privacy. And I think the high level thing here is similar to what we talked about before. There's some amount of data that you wouldn't want to be public, or because it's led to some challenges. The two that come to mind are one, front running when you're trading. So we've seen this quite a bit in DeFi, which is as people see big whales moving, there's often some like huge volatility around that type of trade. And so being able to use something like a private exchange, for example, or private DEX as they're called, would really help to protect against this type of front running. So that's one big area that we've begun to work in and have development in. The other is under collateralized loans. So now in the DeFi space, if you want to participate, you actually have to put up a lot of money. And that's because no one really has any way to identify whether you're a good creditor
Mm-hmm.
online, and on chain or not. And so the sort of simple way to do this is you just say, well, if you put up one ETH, then we know that there's something behind this loan that you're giving. But I don't think that's sustainable in the long run. Like, there's only so many people that will hold one ETH, particularly as the value goes
Mm-hmm.
up. And so the question is, can you give loans or allow people to participate, who have less collateral, but have some other way of proving that they're sort of good for it?
Mm-hmm.
And so this is doable. This is what credit scoring is. But the more rich credit scoring data you can put into a system, the better measure of someone's actual lending capabilities and trust you can provide. And so there's just a lot of, I mean, that's like a huge amount of sensitive data for someone. It's like how they're spending now, where their money comes from. It might be their social security number.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we think about putting that on a blockchain, you'll want all of that information to be held privately
Mm-hmm.
also. And so those are really the two areas where we think, where we're seeing a lot of interest for the network, and where we think we can add the most value as well.
Okay, so you're talking about a blockchain tokenized form of a credit score.
Yeah, and this one, it's less about tokenized. It's just simply having the information in some private way on chain.
Okay,
Yeah.
and have y'all thought about how to? A lot of people hate the credit system,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So
totally.
how would this
Yeah.
be different from that?
Well, I mean, one reason people hate the credit system now is, well, I have two reasons. One is there have been a ton of security breaches, which means your data isn't held privately,
Mm-hmm.
and it's quite dangerous. And the second is the data they use is pretty minimal.
Mm-hmm.
And in large part, that's because they're trying to access public records only.
Mm-hmm.
And so these go hand in hand, right? Like, if you believed your data was more safely protected, you might be more willing to share different types of data about yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore they could come up with a better credit score.
Mm-hmm.
And so in a world where blockchain provides in general just an exceptional amount of security
Mm-hmm.
that the internet today can't. So that's one big benefit. And then if you add privacy on top of that, that gives some additional guarantee that people won't be able to access your data, but they can run analysis on it and get some end result.
Okay. Okay, and you have a network, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oasis Labs has something called the Oasis Network. What is that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Oasis Network is a decentralized blockchain network. And so that's where all of the things I'm talking about happen on this network. So similar to Ethereum, this is it's called the layer one, its own distinct network,
Mm-hmm.
that is run by a utility token called Rose,
Okay.
that basically feeds and powers the network.
Gotcha. And that token,
Mm-hmm.
can people buy it on exchanges?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to any sort of investment advice, but I've been told that it's available on many exchanges.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And then you also have the Oasis Protocol Foundation. What is that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's not, I'd say it's one of the many community players in the space. So the cool thing I think about blockchain as well is it's not about one company just building something and releasing it. It's really about a community creating something together. And so the Oasis Foundation is an early contributor to the network. It was founded by a couple folks who came from labs and then basically went over to start that foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And they're really the arbiters of Rose and are very focused on building the broader ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
Oasis Labs is really focused on this data tokenization work that I just explained.
Gotcha.
And we have, I would say, thousands of other community members. We've got hundreds of node operators, validators on the network, developers,
Mm-hmm.
A bunch of other teams working to make the network stronger and more powerful every day.
Okay, so every product that you have is basically built on this network.
Correct.
And
Yeah.
what are some of the distinguishing factors of the network compared to Ethereum or Bitcoin or Litecoin or all these other coins?
Yeah, so I think Litecoin and Bitcoin are simply for transactions of a coin. So there's not any, you can't do compute on them. But compared to Ethereum, Oasis adds privacy.
Okay.
And it's also much more scalable, which means that it can handle much more complex workloads, more complex transfers faster. And I guess like in really simple terms, that means gas fees are much lower on the Oasis network than they are on Ethereum.
Okay. Do you foresee any NFT art platforms being built on the Oasis network?
I think there likely will be some. We've been talking to a few teams about doing that, and I think the main benefit for them has been, primarily just the fact that it's cheaper to hold these things than you would on Ethereum because gas fees are lower. I think, though, where we'll add unique value really is this idea of, data marketplaces. And so you may see art being a part of that, but I think it'll be more about empowering creators behind who are making that art rather than simply the art itself.
Yeah. So I'm wondering when it comes to the actual kind of packaging of the data in a token and allowing someone to own that token, how are they able to profit from it? Because in the traditional NFT space or NFT artwork space, right? I as a creator, I may create the artwork and then I sell it. And once I sell that NFT to someone else, I don't have any control over what happens with it.
Yeah.
I just get my royalties and that's it. So if I have my data in a token, I would probably be scared to sell it because I don't want to then lose control over that token. So how do I leverage? Do I rent it, lease it?
Yeah, it's a good question. So you could rent it.
Okay.
It's also like you could mint many tokens, right? So you could mint an ecosystem of tokens that represent a percentage of your royalties. And really what you're doing is providing some ownership and value for your future royalties. And so you're getting some cost or payment up front, but then you're also, if the value goes and moves more quickly than the data, there'd be some value there as well. So there's a lot of different options. I think what we've also seen are like these data marketplaces where the token doesn't represent the value as much as it does a way to trade something of value. So it really just depends. But to me, the high level here thing is like, when you sell an NFT, that's kind of it. It's done. In this world, you're selling theoretically someone some amount of your future earnings, and so there's a much longer term investment that can be made with that type of token.
Okay, so I'm trying to see if I understand this, in that the actual data itself, right, that's inside of a token would stay with me, and I can sell other tokens that kind of give people access to the data inside the original token. I guess I'm not fully understanding how I would be able to I'm not fully understanding how other organizations are able to use that data.
Oh, so it totally depends. Basically, like, let's use an example of like, let's say you're a pharmaceutical company, or let's say I'm building an app that's like a healthcare marketplace. Okay. So I work with a lot of individuals and I run a bunch of clinical trials. That data then sits on my network. And I don't really want the pharmaceuticals to have that raw data. Like, that's quite dangerous. But what they might want is some aggregated view of that data. And so what I would do is I would sell them access to that data, and the token represents that access. Okay. So maybe they only get access to that data for 3 days, and the token would basically give them some short-term rent of that data. Okay. So the way I'm earning money is essentially by monetizing this data at scale. Now, the way this works from a technical perspective is it's essentially held in a black box on the network where data is encrypted, it's fed into the network, and the only thing you can do on the other side is run aggregated analysis on it. So you can run some analytics that would say, I want some like trend of how these clinical trials went over time, but I can't see Iris's specific, trial data.
Gotcha.
And so that's the how do you want to think about privacy in this case?
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. So the tokens that I'm selling are providing access to my data, but it's like controlled access.
Yeah, so that'd be one example of what you could do. But I think, for us, this is a technology, and what we're excited about is there's a lot of different applications for how these data tokens could be used. And so it really will depend on how developers decide to interact with them and build them into their system. So there's a lot of different ways they could be used.
So if someone is a developer, let's say someone in our community that's a developer, and they wanted to use the Oasis network to build something, what does that look like? What does that process look like? And do you have like standards to say, well, you can't use our network to build,
I mean, so it is an open source project. So all of the data, all of the information can be found at docs.oasislabs.com. And I mean, right now it's in beta, so it's free. You can try it out. You can test it. We get feedback all the time from those developers about how they're using it. But really, it's a test environment for people to try out. So there aren't a ton of rigid rules at this time. We will add pricing to it, and I think that will create some filters and mechanisms. But yeah, I mean, we're excited to see what people do with it and see. I mean, I think the power of blockchain technology is that it is meant to be open and unrestricted, and so our goal is in part to do that.
Do you have any concerns about with that openness, developers or organizations kind of using the technology for
Not really. I mean, I think it's maybe a better way to frame it is as much as any company should about their product at all. But I think, so of course, I think that, we're in the early stages, and I think we're trying to test and iterate and see what's possible. But I think, so at this stage, I think it's not an eminent concern, but it's certainly something as we scale and grow, we'll need to put more guardrails around for sure.
What is, out of all the people that are using the network or that you're working with, what is kind of the most interesting or exciting use case that you've seen?
Yeah, I'm really excited about this idea of genomic NFTs. I think there's something very cool about that. I think right now, what I think we're seeing with a lot of like direct to consumer genomic packages.
What do you mean by genomic?
Oh, sorry. So, have you heard of like 23andMe?
Yes. Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. Gotcha.
Yeah. So with 23andMe, like you pay, they give you data about yourself, but then they can do whatever they want with that data.
Which is why I have not done any of these tests yet.
It's super scary. Yeah. So we work with this company called Nebula, and they basically do a private version of 23andMe where the data is actually stored on our network. And so to me, what's really cool about that is it's, I think, solving a real issue that exists now. And that I think needs like it's a very cool option to know what your genome is, but I don't want to do it either because I don't really want like the data just being distributed without my without my awareness. Okay. And so this really allows you to know where your data is, control it, and then eventually you'll actually have a token that represents that data. And if you want to leave Nebula and take it with you, you can bring it, if you wanted to bring it to your doctor, like you'd have this representative of the data that only you own. And so, I think it's pretty cool. And I think also serves a real need. Yeah.
I love that. That's super exciting. I have been dying to do a DNA test because, being of African descent, it's really hard to know where you come from. And, and I just, if I wasn't working in tech, I probably would have done it already. My mom has done it.
Yeah, totally.
But now that I'm in tech, I'm like, okay, I know what these companies do with our data. Like I can't.
Yeah, you're like, it's not safe. Yeah, I check out Nebula. I mean, this is live today, so
Okay.
you can totally do it, and it's cool. It's really nice. So yeah,
I'm writing it down right now.
yeah, nebula.com.
Cool. So another question, how does Oasis make money? Like if it's an open source network, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so kind of two ways. So one is the network itself minted this token, Rose, and that has some value ascribed to
Mm-hmm.
it. Oasis is an early contributor. Will have some holding of that token. It's a utility token, so it's not something that we think of as, like for value as per se, but there's some, that may help at some point
Mm-hmm.
in the future. The other aspect is while we don't charge for the product now, we will at some point in the future. Once it gets to sort of production level, which we expect will happen later this year, we'll charge in a similar way that like cloud computing companies charge, so by credit
Mm-hmm.
and by usage of the network. And so so that and then we'll see I think similar growth in or similar metrics that you're seeing in like the cloud space.
Okay, cool. And for anybody who's listening, who is a fan of who likes to buy and trade tokens, smaller tokens, I just looked it up. Oasis Network is on CoinMarketCap if anyone wants to go check it out. And right now it's at 7 cents.
Yeah, I'll let you speak to that. For us, it's just a utility.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, well, cool. Well, yeah, it's if folks are interested, you can learn more about what we're building as well at
Mm-hmm.
oasislabs.com.
Cool. So, one last thing I would say is, what if there's anything that you want our audience that is in the NFT space to take away from this conversation? What would that be?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd say to me, what I'd say is I'm really excited about what we're seeing in the NFT space right now, and to me, it's just the beginning. I think NFTs unlock an entirely new set of technologies and experiences that I think will be really exciting in the future. And so, hopefully, I've just given you guys some glimpse of what one of those future technologies can be.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Anne, for joining us today. It was
Yeah,
great to have you, and I love learning about companies in this
yeah. Thank you so
space and what
much.
they're doing. Super exciting, and I can see 10 years from now Oasis Labs doing really big things and being like, I spoke to them a long time ago. Um, but
Thank
yeah,
you.
thank you for joining us. And to our audience, thank you for tuning in. We are the
Yeah.
NFT Roundtable, and you can learn more at blacknftart.co/nft-roundtable-podcast. And you can follow us on Instagram at NFT Roundtable, just one word. You can also find us on Twitter at NFT Roundtable as well. And thank you again, Anne, for joining us.
Yeah. Yeah, awesome. Really happy to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. It was my pleasure.